So I wasn't actually planning on making a video. It actually like popped into my mind today after I realized that I've got about 10 days before I graduate college and then I'm just getting into the workforce. I'm going to be an adult. I'm 20 years old. I'm going to be an adult, right? I'm going to like actually start having to work. And I figured I'd share some things that I learned cuz I mean, it's mostly for me, but I like to go over things that I learned just to refresh my brain of what's been going on. It might be helpful. I don't know. Anyway, so that's kind of where I'm at, right? So this might be a bit of a rambling video, but I'm just kind of going over what I know. So one of the first things that I kind of learned was like the value of interpersonal relationships, right? So when I was in high school, I had friends. I still talk to a lot of my friends from high school, but I really only had one like real good connection with somebody. I only had like one really, I guess I'd say like a good like relationship with somebody, and it's my buddy from high school. His name's Tanner. He's a cool guy. And we worked together. We hung out like every single day because we had the gym, we had work together, stuff like that, right? And so I got to know him pretty well and we'd hang out all the time, right? And I still hang out with him almost every day, though he's got more school now. But anyway, yeah, like the value of an interpersonal relationship, I think that's very important. I see a lot of people and I see it among a lot of people that I know where, they have a lot of friends but they don't. It's like a lot of people that know them, a lot of people that they hang out with all the time, right? But they don't really know each other very well. They're not people that like you can't like go to them with your problems. You can't like talk through stuff with them because at the end of the day they're like a drinking buddy or just someone that you do something with. And through my school, I went to trade school and I ended up, meeting a lot of people that weren't like that. I ended up meeting a lot of people that were really good friends of mine. I've got a lot of people that I could not talk to them for like 5, 10 years and I could still be just as close with them as when I started out with them, right? There's great people. I still hang out with people that graduated before me because they decided to take, a certain amount of degrees. I decided to take a different amount. That's a different story. That's not a huge point. But they're all working full time. One of them travels around the country everywhere, right? And he still asks me like every single day that he's in town, hey, you want to hang out? Or hey, what are you doing? And it took me a while to realize that, when I was in high school, I didn't really have anybody asking me to hang out. I was usually asking everybody else. It's just kind of weird that people actually, want to hang out with me. And that's a good thing. Valuing interpersonal relationships, that's not something I really did in high school, but it's definitely something that I do now. Some things are just good to talk over with people. Now, the next thing that I like kind of learned from college was having a good relationship with your parents is just great. And not everybody's going to have a great relationship with their parents. Some people have really terrible parents, right? But when I was in college, I knew a lot of people. When I was in college, a lot of people my age ended up hating their parents for really no reason. I see it with a lot of people that I know. I dated a girl that was like that, and I'm like, why do you hate your parents? Because she's like, oh, my dad's never around. It's like, yeah, your dad's never around because he's paying for your college. He's paying for your life that you can have. And I don't think she really understood that, which is kind of unfortunate for her and him. It was it just kind of sucks. You put a bunch of work into something and your kid's ungrateful. Yeah, I think having a good relationship with your parents is very important. I went to a trade school, right? I mentioned that. And a lot of the people there, they value their family because a lot of the people that go to these trade schools, they're from small towns, and family is a big priority there or something. I'm not too sure. I'd have to ask. But, when I started college, I had a pretty okay relationship with my parents. It wasn't bad. I didn't have a bad relationship with them, but I was not nearly as close with them. I kind of ignored them because I figured, oh, my mom and dad, they're going to be around for forever, right? They'll always be there. So I can hang out with my friends who won't always be there. And that's just something I can do. But through the people that I had around me, I kind of started to realize that my parents aren't going to be around forever. And I tell my buddy Tanner this. I told him this before. The thing that like really drove it home for me was like the finale of Young Sheldon, where George Cooper died, and that just kind of like put in my mind. My parents aren't going to be around forever, and I think they deserve to spend time with their kid because they've done a lot for me. spending time with your parents, I think that's good. Having a good relationship with them. I try to make it a priority to spend time with my parents. I know how much they, put aside for me. I mean, one of my parents literally changed countries for me, and I think it's just kind of crappy to see people not being very grateful towards the people that took care of them for at least their first 18 years of their lives. So, I try to make it a point to hang out with my parents. I know how much they put into taking care of me and making sure I was successful. And they gave me a lot of good advice that I don't think I would have gotten anywhere else. And that's another thing that I learned, listening to people that know more than me. And, that kind of sounds obvious, right? But you'd be surprised how many people that don't do that. When I started out in college, I didn't really know anything about how the world worked. I didn't really care because I had my parents to do that for me. So who cares, right? I didn't really care about school in general until, I kind of realized, oh man, that's it, right? But it's an obvious thing that not a lot of people do. I know a few people who don't want to listen to people more successful than them because they're jealous or they think they have no idea what they're talking about. Their advice isn't as current or whatever. And it's I know someone who's gonna be getting married and he's not taking advice from someone who's been married for years and years because he doesn't believe that their ideology works anymore. And it's I don't think that really makes sense. When I finished up my second year in college, I ended up starting an internship at this construction company. And when I started out there, I mean, I know things about electrical. That's my bread and butter. That's what I went to school for. But I didn't really know anything business-wise about it, right? And so I took all the time I could, every moment that I could, to learn from the CEO of the company who decided to take time out of his day to discuss with me everything that goes into running this type of business. And I'm actually going back there full time because, I got to talk to the CEO. I was talking to the engineers. I was trying to learn everything I could about this company and what's going on there because I was genuinely interested in the material, right? And I see it all the time in my classes and with people around me where it's they don't want to learn from other people because their ego won't allow it, or they've got some sort of insecurity about their intelligence or whatever. I don't like assuming what's going on inside people's heads, even though I just did. But you can really see it everywhere. I see it in my classes all the time. I had a kid crash out on me because I was trying to help him and he didn't want my help, and he ended up failing out of the class because of that, which is really lame. If he would have just listened, it wouldn't have been an issue. I just don't understand why you wouldn't want to do that. Another thing that I learned in college was having a hobby is very important, I think, because I can tell you right now, there's a lot of people around me. There's kind of a mental health crisis, and I think that partially is caused by the fact that people don't really have anything to do besides, just run-of-the-mill stuff, oh, I'll go out drinking this weekend, or, I'll watch reels all day. But it's what do you do besides watching reels and consuming stuff? You need to do something that gives you a sort of sense of accomplishment. A couple things that I like doing are, I go to the gym pretty much every single day. 6 days a week I go to the gym unless I am just knockout tired. And my best friend, he plays the drums. He's in 50 bands, and I like to think we're pretty mentally sound. And I think that partially has to do with the fact that, we do stuff. We don't just play video games or just watch Instagram, watch TikTok, whatever you friggin' Gen Zers do. I think a hobby is very important. Not a lot of people really do anything. I know a lot of people who I reconnected with after high school, and they pretty much just say, oh yeah, my hobbies are drinking and watching videos. And that's it sucks. That's no way to live. How are you going to spend your whole, your prime years, allegedly, just doing nothing? That's a huge waste. Put some time into building something. I decided that one of my hobbies was going to be the gym because in high school I got a couple friends that were really cool and got me into it. And that's just something that I don't really understand. And it can be scary, starting something new. I know a lot of people that refuse to start a hobby or something because they're afraid they'll mess up. And I think it's kind of important to not be afraid to mess up things, right? I'm not going to say I'm perfect at that. I've certainly got an ego that gets bruised if I mess something up, right? But I think that's an important thing to do too, not be afraid to screw something up to a certain extent, right? If you like do something that costs you thousands of dollars, that's probably not very good. But just going out and not being afraid to look a little dumb makes your life really fun. Another thing that I think is very important to know as an adult is being able to go out and have a good time without the use of substances, right? And so what do I mean by that? I mean, like, being able to go out and hang out with people without having to, make alcohol or weed or whatever other, substance of choice the focus, right? I see that a lot among people older than me and people in the same age range as me is like, what are we going to do this weekend? Oh, let's just, go and get something to drink. Let's go drink. And that's like pretty much all they do. They bar hop, they sit in their backyard and drink. And I think that's fine every now and then. I like to indulge on occasions, but I don't think it's very good for your interpersonal relationships to not be able to spend any time with anybody sober, especially as someone in your 20s, because the stuff that you do now is gonna, build on itself later on. And that's another thing that moves me on to my next point, that you should be setting the building blocks up for what you're going to do in your future, right? So I think you can make or break habits in your 20s pretty easily, and it gets harder to do as you get older. Your brain just kind of gets used to that whole routine of doing this thing, and this thing, right? And so I think if you can set your brain up with some good habits that will end up making you successful, like checking your credit card every week, at the end of every week, being able to understand what is going on in your savings account, knowing how to spend, save, invest, things like that. Having a healthy hobby, like going to the gym, eating healthy, get your diet straight, develop a good work ethic. I think all of those things are a very good foundation to becoming an adult. And I've seen it with a lot of my mentors that that's kind of what they did. They didn't, I'm not saying you got to spend your 20s being completely serious. I have for sure not done that, but your 20s are the time for you to become better or set up things that are going to help you out. Your 20s are like the prime time to set up your future. A lot of people, they don't really worry about setting up their future till they get into their mid 20s or late 20s, and then it's like a little too late, right? So that leads me to my next point, which kind of goes hand in hand with building habits. Start investing in your future. You don't have to do anything crazy. You don't have to become like some crazy finance bro, but I think that in your 20s you should, open a Roth or start putting money into something that'll appreciate an interest. I think that you should invest in your physical well-being, because there have been plenty of studies that show that the more like muscle mass you have, the longer you live, the longer you stay out of a nursing home, stuff like that. And a lot of people, they just become fat and frail when they get into their 30s and 40s, and just kind of blame it on their metabolism, which is directly related to living tissue in your body. So that's another big thing that I think a lot of people should know. The next thing that I think, kind of makes sense, or like is kind of an important value to have, is that relationships don't mean everything, right? So what does that mean? What I mean by that is relationships are great. I have plenty of friendships, but you can't be afraid to lose people, right? When I was in my first year of college, I was dating this girl, and she was like the worst. She killed my mental health, on top of being in a trade school where they were like really hard on you if you like messed up anything. It just like destroyed me. And I didn't stop talking to her because I was partially afraid of ending that whole ordeal that I had going, because I was insecure or whatever. I don't know. Relationships aren't everything. And I see a lot of people, they prioritize relationships over their future. And it's like kind of one of those deals where you have to put on your oxygen mask before helping others. How do you expect to be able to have a future with somebody when you hardly have a future set up for yourself? And I don't think a lot of people think that through, or they, think, oh, you're just saying a bunch of bullshit. I think that it's still a good mantra to have. It's like, how are you going to support somebody if you can't support yourself? The last thing that I'll like kind of cover is something I've been thinking for a really long time, and that's you become what you behold, right? So that kind of ties into my other 2 points that I had, where it's like, you got to keep people around, but you also don't want to be afraid to get rid of people. So, if you surround yourself with great influences, you're going to be pressured into being like those people. You know, two people who go to the gym a lot, you're going to become the third person that goes to the gym a lot, right? Or it goes the other way too. It's like you surround yourself with two fat chud alcoholics, you're going to become the third fat chud alcoholic. You know, you don't want to cut off people because they're struggling. That's not what I'm saying at all. But the people you surround yourself with influence your everyday decisions. So you just kind of got to be careful, you know? That's about pretty much everything that I think I've learned through college. I'm sure there's things that I'm missing, but I don't want this to seem like a list of things you have to do or things that you're going to be a failure in life otherwise. And I don't want it to seem impossible. I don't know how impossible these tasks seem, but I can confidently say that everything that I've listed are things that I try to do every single day, and I like to think I do them every single day. But that's pretty much all I got for you. Hope you guys enjoyed, I guess. And I'll see you later.